Welcome to the Learning Reimagined podcast, where we discuss solutions to employee training and development challenges in the Caribbean. We speak with Caribbean professionals who are experts at helping people in Caribbean organizations excel. And we want to help you, our Caribbean audience, level up your teams, your employees, so that your businesses can succeed. Denningberg is a global HR leader who loves transforming businesses that are in high growth mode. His approaches are culturally sensitive, and his experience spans the UK, Europe, the US, Latin America, and CARICOM. He has worked with B2B and B2C businesses of all sizes in sectors spanning telecommunications, financial services, banking, technology, and consulting. So Dan, thank you so much for being here with us. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights into leadership training in organizations. And I know you have a lot of experience. And the first thing that I want to dive into is, how can HR managers develop an employee training program specifically for succession planning?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
It's a really good question. So succession planning is something that most organizations definitely aspire to doing. Some think they're doing it, and whether they're doing it terribly well is another matter, but it should always be driven by HR. You know, HR should always be the ones that are promoting succession planning, talking to their bosses, talking to the CEO about the need for succession planning. Otherwise, it will tend to fall by the wayside.
Right.
What I always tell HR people is that it's one thing to say that we need succession planning, but how on earth do you actually go about doing that, of course? And for me, there's 6 very specific tenets that you need to follow. And actually, you can do it through a step process. And if you do it right, you're going to have a really robust succession planning process in place. The first place, really, really obvious, identify where the risks are. So what are the critical roles within the business? Now, you might over time sort of expand it much further than that as well, but the starting point really needs to be your most important roles. That might be the very top role, and the one level down maybe. That's always a very good starting point, because if you lose people at that level, particularly with no notice, then you're obviously going to be impacted as a business. So absolutely, which are your critical roles? It's not just your senior roles as well. It's those with really specific skills that actually is really hard to come by in the marketplace and so on. So if you lose those skills, you're in trouble. So start by identifying exactly what those risks are. And then obviously that then tells you, well, who do we have in the business today? There's always a list of people. You always know instinctively, actually, it might be that person's number 2 at the moment. It might be somebody in a different area of the business, but still somebody that is displaying the right behaviors that we're thinking at some point, this could be a very good natural successor. At the same time, you want to conduct a skills gap analysis as well. So that's using the people that you've identified in the business. So you're saying, I found person A who would be a really good successor for this particular role. Now let's look at the skills that they have today and what skills will they need for the role in the future. And that will then tell you exactly what's needed. How far away are they? Are they a year away? Are they ready now maybe? Or are they 2 years away? And what do we need to do between now and then to actually get them there? And then, of course, you develop the training plan. So that all builds that plan over whatever period of time. And I think within there, this is one of the most important pieces that often gets missed, is you must always incorporate mentoring and coaching. Because it's very easy to put in sort of classroom training and so on, and that's very impactful, very powerful. You might want to do some external training and certifications maybe, dependent on the role. There's nothing more powerful than coaching. And that can come internally in the business and externally. And the power of both is definitely there and very different as well. The internal piece, obviously, is probably the person doing the role today, maybe. I mean, who better to tell you how to do the role than the person that's doing it today, provided they're doing a good job, obviously. So that's always a judgment call on the part of HR. But nonetheless, it might be the person doing the role. It might be somebody at a similar level. Because again, it isn't just coaching on the technical skills of the role. You know, particularly if it's a step up for the individual, it most likely would be. It's how do they project themselves to a different level? What are the requirements within the organization itself? And then there's the power of the external coach as well. So somebody that is completely independent, but somebody that, again, can really get into who you are, what your character is, how people see you, how you see yourself as well. And obviously then you can start to talk about your career and what it's going to take over and above the technical abilities that you're going to need to be able to perform a role. And then as HR in that process, it's constantly iterative. I mean, you never stop asking that question. So the first time the HR manager goes into the CEO's office to say, we need a succession planning program, a proper structured program, that's not a one-time question. This is constantly being asked. Okay, you're going to develop that list on day one. But you're going to be constantly adding to it, constantly changing. People will come and go. Some people that you think is a successor might not be the right person in the end.
Right.
You've got to be constantly revisiting this. It never, ever stops.
Okay. And you mentioned the need for identifying the skills that these successors would have, right? Outside of the technical skills that you mentioned.
Yes.
What else should people be looking for in these successors? What specific skills?
I think it's a great opportunity, again, that's often missed, to look at the values and look at the behavioral side of the role. So again, let's imagine you're talking about promoting somebody into a senior leadership team, for example. Yes, does that person know commercially how to do that role, technically how to do that role, and so on? And there are obviously some gaps in there that you might want to plug. It's also an opportunity, I think, for HR to look at the dynamics of that senior team, because they're going to be introducing somebody else into that group at some point in the near future or long-term future.
Right.
Is that an opportunity to be saying, actually, we want a different dynamic? And I'm not just talking about diversity specifically, although that's part of it as well, of course, but it is also a diversity in thinking. So is this an opportunity that we could actually bring fresh thinking into that group? And instinctively as HR, if you know the people and you know the culture, you will be thinking to yourself, will this person survive in that group? You know, they might be technically the best person, but actually will they survive? So how do we make sure that we're setting that person up to succeed? So it's not just focusing on the technical training. And again, that comes back to the coaching as well, arguably, because it touches on, again, the softer side of your skills, your personality, your character. And that's what we want to bring in, particularly into a senior team as well.
Definitely. And you mentioned mentorship and coaching a lot, which, as you said, is one of the things that's often missing because it's so hard to find the right mentors. What approach should people take to deal with mentorship and coaching for successors to make that whole process effective?
I think it has to be a two-way thing. So whether you're a mentor or a coach, and there are subtle differences between what is a mentor, what is a coach, and so on. But still, finding the best mentor and the best coach isn't always the easiest thing to do. I know I've given an example of perhaps the person doing the job today. Not if they're not the right kind of coach, all right? And not if they're able to coach and mentor somebody. So again, you know, the person on the other side has to be of the right frame of mind, the right personality to be able to do this. And of course, you can train people for that as well. But the skills that you're looking for, what you are absolutely looking for is that chemistry. Especially with an external coach, just because as the individual being coached, you want to know that you can trust that person. You want to know that they're going to challenge you. You know, any kind of mentoring and coaching relationship, it's not about giving you the answers. It's not about giving you an easy way through. So you hit a roadblock, they're just going to tell you how to unblock it and off you go. You know, they're really going to challenge you. And there's nothing more impactful than a coach or a mentor who is really going to take you out of your comfort zone.
Definitely.
And that is the most powerful thing that any leader of today or aspiring leader can ever do. And, you know, I recommend anybody in any capacity in any company to go to their HR and say, actually, can I be mentored by somebody in the business? There is always somebody that wants to mentor somebody else as well. Go and find these people. They're definitely there.
Awesome. That's interesting because I would figure that sometimes people who are mentor or who are being asked to be mentors, they probably don't have the time to do the mentorship. So how do you go over that barrier of? I
think that has to start at the top, because you're absolutely right. It's far too easy for people to say, get me on board, would love to do that. Just not today because I'm too busy. You know, everybody's always got a day job and so on. And it's the same arguably for the person being mentored as well. There's always something. When I say start at the top, what I mean is the top management need to really buy into this. They really need to understand the power of what this can actually do for their staff. And so they need to carve out the time, and they need to support the employees, whether you're the mentor or the mentee. You need to carve out the time. And HR can help in terms of how you structure the sessions, how frequently, and so on. But nonetheless, it is on the two individuals to make it work. And, you know, HR should be there to make sure that it's effective and that obviously longer term, you're getting the right outcomes for these things. But quite frankly, it's discipline. You've got to make it work. If you're the mentee, this is all for you. solely for your benefit. So you've got to go and make it work. And if it doesn't work with that mentor, go and have that conversation. As a mentor, if you don't have the time, be honest about it. But I find that rarely happens when you do find the right people, because they understand they've got the time, they can commit the time to it, and they get just as much out of it as a mentor as the mentee does.
Right. So following from that question, Dan, as we're talking about succession planning, when should leadership training begin for lower level employees? Should it start only when they're being considered for leadership positions?
Love this question, because again, so many think that that's where it should start. And arguably when you're building programs, you tend to start at the top, you get your senior leadership, and then you manage your training and so on. And you can kind of then build an aspiring manager's course as well. And that's where, you've got a cohort of people that aren't in management positions today, but either they've stepped forward or their manager is spotting the potential, and we're saying, oh, let's get these people ready now to become the next leader. And of course, that's fabulous, and we absolutely should always be doing that, particularly as HR as well. But I do think that misses the point slightly, because then you've got to really challenge, well, what is leadership? What do we mean by it? Because are we talking management or are we talking leadership? Now, management is very tactical, it's very specific, it's very HR-y in many ways. It's how you handle certain situations and follow policy and so on. Leadership is so much more than that, obviously. And it's a huge topic and a very interesting one. Not everybody can make that crossover from being a great manager to a great leader. In fact, some great leaders are not very good managers as well. Let's not forget that. But bringing it back to the question, I think it's a real shame to sort of almost only focus on those that have been identified as potential future leaders. Because again, what does leadership mean? It's around behaviors, it's around the impact that you can have on people. And that doesn't have to be limited to then only deploying those skills when you're a manager of people or leader of people. You should be displaying these skills every day in any capacity. So by understanding, well, what do we mean by leadership? And every company might be slightly different in terms of what leadership means for them as a business, but work that out and then find a way of actually making sure that everybody in the business has access and equal access to the training that comes with that, because absolutely that gets them ready for an actual leadership position further down the line. But it prepares them for so much more as well. You could be in a project management role or looking to get into project management. It's different to leadership, but you're learning the core values of leadership at a very early stage in your career. And who knows where that might take you. So for me, a responsible company should look at all of its employees in an ideal world and say, you're all leaders today. Some of you in title, some of you in team size, but you are all leaders in your own way. Right. Now it's our job to try and drive out why we think you're a leader. And actually, if we get you thinking that way, it changes your perspective. And there's no greater impact on employee engagement, for example, when you get to go home at the end of the day and you're working for a business and you can tell your family and friends and loved ones that I work for a business. They see me as a leader. No matter what job I do, I am a leader. I'm expected to have an influence and an impact on the people I work with. I mean, that's the kind of company I would want to work for.
Definitely. You feel valued, you feel seen, you feel like people care.
Exactly, exactly. And you care about each other. And it's not just a manager-employee relationship. Exactly. It's peer-to-peer, it's team-to-team and so on. It's so powerful.
And then building on that point, as you mentioned, it's important to train everybody in the skills that leaders should have. But what are those skills that we're training them in, really?
So again, I think that definitely comes back down to the softer side as well. And again, you kind of end up in a situation, do you want a one size fits all, or do you want to try and make it a little bit more ad hoc or a little bit more specific for certain teams? And again, that will be down to each company and team to decide. But I think central to all of that anyway, again, is, okay, as leaders within any business, how do we want to lead? How do we want to be seen and felt by everybody else? Right. What does everybody else's experience of me need to feel and look like and so on? What is the feedback I want to receive as a leader? And so that all comes into, again, how I project myself, how I support others, how I put others before myself and so on, how I make sure everybody's got the tools to be able to do their job. And then that's slightly easier if you're managing people because you've got a bit more opportunity to influence and so on. But it's not exclusively for that either. You see your teammate who does the same job as you, but they're falling behind. Perhaps they've not had the same training as you or not come into the business with the same experience. As a leader, as long as you have those skills to spot it, go and fix it. Go and be part of that solution as well. Don't just wait for the manager to pick up on it, and we then risk losing people and so on. Take responsibility for it as well. I say it frequently during my day job. We're all grown-ups. And I do believe in that. So it's a real throwaway comment sometimes, but I do mean it. We're all grown-ups, and you get out what you put in. We can't make everybody a superstar. We can't make everybody a future leader, but we can make sure everybody enjoys their job and has the ability to do their job as best as they can. And that's not just on the manager.
That's all. Everybody is a part of the process.
Yes.
Everybody. All right. So going to the broad spectrum of leadership training programs.
Yes.
What does an effective leadership training program look like?
So a really effective one. I think first and foremost, you've got to understand what the challenges are for the business. Now, that's going to differ by every business, but typically it will be around change. It'll be around the economic situation, maybe. It'll be around the competitive environment as well. And I think it really depends which level you're going after as well. And I think the answer can be slightly different. But, I'm going to make an assumption here. We're talking perhaps about the senior team as a first, because you need them to make sure they're pulling in the right direction and got the skills that you need.
Start there and...
Exactly. So if you think about a senior leadership team, you really need to customize that program so that we're building the commercial skills of that senior leadership team. So it doesn't forget the importance of values and so on. That's absolutely, in fact, that's the most essential, because they're the ones that will display those values. And if they can't display it, you can't expect anybody else to. So you've got to get that right as well. But also at a senior leadership level, you've absolutely got to understand the broader commercial context. Whoever your bosses are, whoever owns the company, whether it's one person or if it's a number of investors maybe, whoever those people are, you've got to create value for those people. And as a senior leader within the business, no matter what your role is, what area of the business you're responsible for, everything you do is about creating value. That's at the center of absolutely everything. What that means for you as an individual and for your team will be different things, but it's how am I creating value? And that's the most powerful way for any HR person, for example, to start thinking. And not to divert too much, but I think it's an important point in terms of creating value, particularly for HR, is that HR forgets that. So HR, for everything they do, every initiative, every program, every framework, whatever they put in place, have got to be challenging. Well, what value am I creating in doing this? And that might be shareholder value, it might be customer value, it might be employee value, and so on. But as long as you can talk about value, you need your senior leadership team to be able to do the same. So what value am I creating here? And that's then about understanding them, taking them away from their own domain. So it's taking your CFO out of the finance space and your CTO out of the technical space and your CPO, CHRO out of the HR space as well. And saying, actually, do you know who our customers are? And that's not meant in a flippant way, but do you know how we reach our customers? What tactics do we use? Who are our competitors? And it might sound really obvious because you can always name your competitors. You always know who they are. Do you know how they work? Do you really know what their services are and their products and how they differ to ours and why they might be more successful than us or less successful? But what are they investing in? What's going on in the broader industry as well? What are the trends that are coming over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? How do we anticipate them now? How do we get the skills in the business now so that we're ahead of the curve? Are we innovating enough? And then, of course, it's the team dynamic. So that leadership team, well, how are you as a group? Do you come together once a week, once a month, and you just sort of talk about your area, and then you flip it over and you're done. Phew, I've gone through it, and I've not been fired and so on. But it's more than that. You've got to be challenging your colleagues, and you've got to be comfortable to challenge your colleagues and comfortable to be challenged by your colleagues as well. Because again, they should all be saying the same to you. That sounds like a fabulous idea, Dan, that you're going to introduce, but where's the value in that? Okay, it's not going to change anything. It's not moving the needle on anything. So then why do it? I'd rather focus on 3 things and do them really, really well than 10 things and sort of only touch the surface on those. Right.
So, Odin, time, Odin? Oh, sorry. Okay, so, and I lost the point that I had a while ago. So basically, we need to create a culture of value then, Dan, within an organization. And how do we go about creating a culture of value?
I think there's any number of ways of doing it. And I think largely it depends how old the business is, for example. So, I mean, if it's a company that's been going around for 100 years, for example, you still need to really revisit, well, whatever values we might have started with, does that still hold today? If you're a brand new business starting up, well, what do we want to be seen? How do we want the community to see us? What's the impact that we want to be having on our staff and on the wider community, maybe? And through that, you will develop a very natural set of values. The risk I always see with values is that a lot of companies will be very quick to bring together a set of values, put it straight on the website, and here's our values. Right. Fabulous. It looks great as stuff on the wall and so on. And you go and talk to any employee in that business and you say two things. You ask them two things. One, can you recite the values? Most of them won't be able to. If they can recite them, or once you remind them of them, do you believe that the business actually lives those values? I think evidence would suggest that that's perhaps not always the most positive of answers. And that's a real shame, because it's a real missed opportunity. And that might be because the values are a bit too broad. They're almost meaningless, or that they do have real purpose behind them, but we've simply not trained the senior leadership, first of all, because again, without them displaying it, you can't expect anybody else.
Right.
So absolutely. So in terms of what the values are, that's going to be very specific on the organization. It's going to be what's their relationship with the customer, what do they want the customer to see them as. That will often drive a lot of the values as well, as clearly as what do we want our employees to experience as well. But the biggest test is not coming up with the words. It's making sure that it's not just trained with the senior leaders, it's embedded in every process. It's embedded in everything the organization does. Ideally, without you even using the words, because you should be able to say at any particular point, did you know that one of our values was X? And that person might say, I didn't know that was enshrined as a value, but I feel that every day because it's in our performance review process. It's in the way that we hire internally. It's in the way that we manage performances. Whatever, it's wedded through absolutely everything that the organization does. So yes, you can show me the values. I believe them because I feel them every single day.
Through every fiber of the organization.
Exactly.
Right. So, Dan, how can HR leaders plan leadership training proactively?
Yes.
So they can get the best return on investment from their training initiatives?
And here's the value question again. Absolutely. Again, but it's always there, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think, again, you have to be very clear as to what challenge are you actually solving. Because I think you'd be amazed how many HR people will be asked by the business to put together a program, and they might be very good at pulling together programs, generally speaking, but could they articulate what problem they're solving? I bet they can't, other than a hypothetical one. And so I think really understanding, so what are the real challenges? And again, you want your CEO or MD, you want your senior team all on the same page with this. Because absolutely, there will be 1, 2, or 3 real big challenges coming down the line that's going to hit that business, or is already hitting that business. So how do we go and solve those problems? So once you've identified that, again, you go through a skills gap analysis, because again, you want to understand, all right, we know where we want to be. We know the profile of the manager or leader that we're looking for here. We know our current cohort. Well, what are the gaps? Where do we need to plug those? And HR, again, sometimes make a mistake of trying to do it all themselves, of course. And the most powerful thing they can do is get the right people into the room at the same time and ask them the right questions. Okay. And that is, we believe the challenge is this. Do you agree, first and foremost? Because you can't not agree with that. Let's be honest. It has to be the challenge. So therefore, how do we solve this? How do we make this a real thing? And then that becomes a customization point as well. How you set the goals and objectives with it as well. Again, that is just something that is always missed. Is, okay, we're going to send you on a training program for a day, a week, a month, whatever it is. But then that's kind of it. We're going to leave you to it then. Well, not really. How are we constantly making sure that we're getting that return on investment? Okay. So there's a number of metrics that HR ought to be putting in place, and they're fairly straightforward. There's things around retention, of course, how many people have been promoted that have come out of that cohort, and so on. And if you're running any kind of EMPS, again, you should over time start to see that correlate in more positive scores and more positive feedback as well. And particularly then, if you run more peer-to-peer feedback, again, you get to really start to see some real rich data and feedback around the impact that people are actually having. That's the true result of any kind of management training. And the ROI, we do struggle to put a pound sign or dollar sign next to them sometimes.
That's true.
But so you find whatever you can in terms of metrics and so on to try and support that case. But absolutely the metrics are there.
And these metrics, based on what you're saying, are more so long-term metrics, right? Not something that you're going to be able to measure directly as the training ends, basically. Or do you have some that you can?
Not necessarily. I think most of them can be a bit longer term. I think, if you have these as regular, so these are not one-offs and so on, you're running it over a long period of time and so on, you absolutely do get that long-term input. I think the shorter term, it depends how short term. And, CEOs often do want to know, look, okay, I'm going to support you in investing X number of dollars into this program. Within a month, I need to see what we're getting for that. Well, that's then down to HR's relationship with the CEO that, again, you need to think a little bit bigger here. And this is not about getting an immediate return. We have a problem. We have a challenge. Let's bring it back to that. And for us to solve that problem, there's no one quick silver bullet that's going to do that. We need to do a number of things. It's heavily customized. It's very much specific to us as a business and the industry that you operate in and our customers and what they want. That it is going to take a bit of time for us to see the return. But actually, I can tell you what will happen if we don't do this. All right. And again, that's not a metric, but I can tell you today's metric of turnover is this. I can tell you that the amount of people we're promoting internally is this. That is not good enough. I can look in the industry and see where that sits against the industry, but it almost doesn't matter. I'm not comfortable with that as a HR leader. I want better than that. And I will be measuring this month on month. I don't think we're going to see an immediate turnaround because I think the problem isn't that simple. But it will come, and you need to trust me as HR. You need to trust my colleagues that this will actually work.
Amen. Agreed. So Dan, what are some of the biggest challenges that execs face, and how can leadership training help them overcome those challenges?
Love that. So I think you could walk into any organization in the world of any size, and the exec teams are facing exactly the same problems. Now, what's causing them will be different, and how it's impacting them will be very different, and so on. And the solutions arguably will vary as well. But change. We always talk about change as though it's a new phenomena and so on. And for me, it's exactly, it's so regular that actually I'm surprised we still refer to it as change, to be honest, just because, well, we're constantly evolving as a business. Any company I've ever worked for is constantly evolving. And if you're moving forward and you're challenging yourselves and so on, then you should be constantly changing. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody, particularly at an exec level, is comfortable with that. And so getting them ready for change and getting their mindset ready for evolution and actually having them as part of that journey as well, so that changes are being done to them. Ultimately, if you're at exec level anyway, you're in a very commercial role, clearly a very senior role as well. So you should understand the role that you play in change. And then it's down to how you communicate through your teams as well, so that they're also equally comfortable with the nature of the change that is happening or is about to happen as well. So getting people through that and understanding the different emotional responses as well can be really helpful. And then in terms of the actual training, it's not just how the exec deals with the change, but it's also how they can support their teams through it as well, which is really important. And I think then it's complexity as well. I don't know many businesses that aren't complex. A business might be very obvious what a company does, what it's there for, and so on. But the way that it achieves it can be very complex. And then when you throw in people and culture and so on, it just adds to the complexity of how we do it. And I hear a lot of people refer to it as noise. There's a lot of noise here around, we're trying to achieve this, and yet there's a lot of noise. Well, that's because there's complexity. And if there's too much noise, it's probably because you've not communicated it very clearly. So people don't understand why we're doing this. Right. And that's people across the whole of the organization. So when you're hearing that or finding that you're giving that kind of feedback, particularly at an exec level, you need to be the one that is saying there's a reason why that is. It's because we've not told people, or we think we've told people, perhaps in an email to the whole staff or even in a town hall maybe, but actually we've not used the right language. It's just not resonated. And you can't always do that from a CEO to the rest of the organization. You need to channel it through the teams as well. So have they fully understood it as exec team members? do they then make sure that their team fully understands it in a language that makes sense for them as well? So making sure that they do that. I think any other company, every company I know, it's all about building high performance teams as well. We all say we do it. We all say we want it, certainly. Do we all do it? Well, that's a matter of opinion, of course. And that arguably comes back to the earlier questions as well in terms of, so what kind of culture do we need? What kind of leaders are we looking for? And using those skills and those voices in the business at all levels. What does high performance actually means? And again, that's where you can use your HR teams who will be able to support the business in terms of putting in the right frameworks to really drive high performance. And that's looking at more than just goals and objectives. It's looking at reward. How are we incentivizing people at the moment? And again, that's over and above just a basic salary question, because that's too simplistic. How else are we incentivizing people? And that's not always money either. How are we motivating people? How are we building careers for people as well? Because again, that's something else. Again, we talk about succession planning. There's also career mapping, right, which is not quite the same thing, but it is about saying, look, you've come in job A today. I'm going to tell you from today. I'm not going to wait a year because I don't want you to have eyes on something else. No, I'm going to be bold and brave and say, actually, come here. We should have discussed this in your interview, arguably, is actually you come in this role. This is the map that you could follow. You might find you go in any number of different directions as well. But come here because we will build a career for you. There will be structured training. You'll be able to get exposure to different parts of the business as well. These are very powerful messages to any employee that I can really build something here, especially in a very competitive marketplace as well. So as execs, absolutely lean on your HR team, present them with the challenge that you're seeing as well. Don't just wait for HR to come to you to say, we think this might be an issue. Go to HR and say, I'm worried about my team. I'm worried about where the next generation of talent is going to come into the business from. What can we do together to solve this problem?
Definitely agree. I won't dive into the career mapping.
Yes.
But that's such an important point. Very important point. But then my next question is, how can leaders learn to manage conflict effectively and create a positive work environment for their teams?
So I think I would almost draw on part of my previous answer in terms of that communication piece. Now, you can communicate the organizational goals and so on. You're never going to eradicate conflict. You hire people, you're going to get conflict. It's one of life's mysteries, unfortunately, as to why we have to have conflicts. But hey, that's just who we are as human beings. So I'm afraid conflict is always there. How you deal with it makes the company great or not.
Right.
And so as senior leaders, you have to be able to spot the triggers for conflict and what are the root causes for that. Now, there can be any number of answers for that, of course. But as a leader, you need to be able to spot over and above thinking that one person is the problem. Okay, it's usually deeper than that, and it's usually more systemic than that. So again, it's think a little bit bigger. Be a little bit braver in your questioning as well, and start to really think about what are the root causes of conflict in this business. Look around your table as execs. We have conflict all the time. Why is that? How do we get through it? How do we resolve it? Do we resolve it? I don't know. And then it becomes about, and these are these skills that as exec leaders maybe struggle to unlock a little bit, becoming active listeners. Execs tend to want to be the voice and, the person that's heard and so on, and giving the direction and so on. Actually getting an exec leader to just keep quiet and listen and engage a different faculty. It can be very difficult, and it often is against their instinct sometimes to do that. But actually, you find out so much when you listen. It's quite incredible. And actually, it's things you probably would never have known about. So hold on a second, I've got a very different perspective now on what's going on. And I would never have seen it if I hadn't have gone into listening mode. So training that's not an easy thing to train, actually. And I find that some things you can't necessarily train in people, but I think you can certainly shine a light on, look, you're not listening enough. You're not hearing people. You're not hearing what they're bringing to you, and you're certainly not observing what's going on around you either. And until you do that, you're not going to actually resolve any of the conflict. All that's going to happen is things are going to blow out of all proportion, and you're going to pull HR in and say, I've got a problem. Can you come and sort it out, please? Now, if I'm that HR person, I'm saying, well, what have you done up to this point to try and resolve this? Because, I don't see HR as there to solve everybody's problem for them, for example. So as a senior leader, what have you done up to this point? Because if you've done absolutely everything you possibly can, then yeah, we'll step in and see what else we can do to support. But invariably, that leader probably can't really say they've done a great deal, unfortunately. And again, what missed opportunities that is, because things just get out of hand. It's not how people want things to end and so on, but all of a sudden you're in recovery mode rather than turnaround mode. And unfortunately, things can be a bit too late by then, unfortunately.
Yes. And conflict is such a big thing in organizations. And as you said, a lot of the times leaders make things blow out of proportion when they don't need to be blown out of proportion. So listening and communicating effectively is so important.
Yes, agreed.
So finally, Dan, we've had a wonderful conversation and I would love to hear from you what you think the key trends are in leadership training and how organizations in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, can stay ahead of the curve.
So this is the hot topic, but I feel like this has been the hot topic for 2 or 3 years now. But I'm going to say it: hybrid working.
Yes.
Or remote working, whatever phrase you prefer to use. But it's not a new thing. It's been forced upon us. I remember being asked this question in the first 6 months of the pandemic when everything was closed down. So everybody was working remotely, of course, and there was a big push even in those early days. Okay, is anybody ever going to go back to the office? And actually there was a trend of big companies typically spotting a very early opportunity in real estate to save money. Actually, I don't need to rent all this space, or I could sublet it maybe. So, they actually drew down on their real estate and to save money. And that was, this is clearly the way the industry is going to move. People are just going to be working from home. You fast forward now to 2023, things kind of went the other way. Companies started to say, actually, we value you in the office more than at home. And there's good reason for that as well, in my opinion. There's no substitute for being sat with your peers and actually learning. And it's the art of the listening as well. You're going to be sat at your desk working away, but it's the conversation that's happening around you. It's those nuggets that you just miss at home. And I could talk all day about mental health as well and working remotely and the impact that can have on mental health. But that's probably a very different podcast maybe. But certainly, I think what companies are now doing is trying to find that middle ground. And again, as senior leaders, you've got to be in tune to the fact that we have a different expectation from employees now, especially those entering the organization fresh. They will have different expectations, particularly the new generation of people entering the workforce.
Definitely.
They will have the ability and they will be saying, I'm not going to join your company unless I can work from home 4 days a week or 3 days a week or even 5 days a week. As a company, you've got to decide where you sit and stick to it and you've got to get it right. And now that's not an easy thing to do, but you've got to be very clear as to why you're doing it and where you place your values. For me, absolutely, everything should be driven by talent. And I'll bring it all the way back to value creation, because you get your value by talent and through people. And for me, it's wherever you can get the very best people, go and get them. Now, if that means that they work remotely, they work remotely. It doesn't work for every company, of course. There's some roles where that simply can't happen. Some companies where that just cannot happen. But the vast majority, we're in a digital age. You should be able to facilitate definitely hybrid working, in my opinion. And then data. Data, and again, back to value creation, but everything, there's power in data, understanding the commercial impact of every single decision that you make. And as exec leaders, there's no end to the training and the coaching that you should be receiving from internal or even external about the value that your role is creating and the ability to draw on data to prove, to justify, to explain, to support, whatever it might well be. People like numbers. There's safety in numbers. And I mean accounting here, but I mean revenue, I mean EBITDA and so on. You have to be able to talk in those languages without being a fully trained accountant. So again, as HR and as, whether it's external training or not, certainly companies I've worked for, we've always brought in finance for non-finance people. And it's because we're not trying to turn them into accountants, but we do want them to understand a balance sheet. That's always nice to be able to do, is to look through all that numbers, but tell me, are we performing well or not? Are we behind or ahead? So not being too bamboozled by a page full of numbers, but also taking it a step much further than that. It's that commerciality around us as a business. How do we achieve our revenue? what are our expectations? What are our stakeholder or shareholder commitments? How are we actually dealing with the people that are our customers, for example? What are their expectations? So again, I think it has to be around being more data driven, and that's not a comfortable place for a lot of people to operate in.
Not at all. Dan, this has been a fantastic interview. I've learned a lot. I wish we could have dived deeper into some of the questions and the answers that you gave. But thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
And if people want to reach out to you for possibly executive leadership training, consulting, how can they reach you?
LinkedIn is absolutely fine for now. Absolutely fine. So I'm not sure if you provide any details or not.
Yeah, man, I can give them the details.
Yeah, that's fine. Things will be said. I'd love to be able to say visit www. Just not,
in due time.
Just notyet.com, basically. Yes.
Awesome. So please, everybody, check out Dan's LinkedIn. I'll put it in the description box below. And you can always reach out to him. He's open to hearing your questions, answering, and setting up consultation. All right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Pleasure.
Dan.
Thank you.